It was 3:47 in the morning when Marcus Williams opened his eyes. He hadn't been asleep. Sleep required the kind of peace that came from believing things were under control, and Marcus had stopped believing that a long time ago. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee. The screen of his laptop glowed in the darkness, illuminating his face, 42 years old. Black tired in a way that went deeper than any single night's exhaustion. The spreadsheet in front of him refused to balance. Numbers that should have aligned were scattered across the columns like broken promises. Each one represented a shipment delayed. Each one meant a vendor contract threatened. Each one meant a client who might take their business elsewhere. The vendor issue had escalated overnight. An overseas supplier had missed their window, which meant the entire logistics timeline for a mid-size manufacturing client was now compressed into something impossible. Someone had to solve it before the 9 a.m. meeting. Someone had to figure out an alternative route, negotiate with a backup vendor, and present it all with confidence. The kind of confidence that came from never admitting you were terrified. Marcus had gotten good at that. Never admitting fear. He looked at his phone. 3:52 a.m. He calculated the hours until he needed to leave for work. Then he calculated the hours until he needed to pick up Mia from school. Then he calculated what those two pieces of time looked like when you tried to fit them both into one day. And how many times he'd already done this calculation. And how many times it had come out wrong. Earlier that morning, yesterday morning, technically, since it felt like a lifetime ago, he had made a promise. Mia was 6 years old. She had her mother's cheekbones. She had his tendency to think before speaking. She sat at the kitchen table eating her cereal, watching him move around the kitchen with patient eyes. The eyes of a child who had learned to observe the adults in her life very carefully. She didn't ask questions. She didn't complain. She just watched. "I'll pick you up on time today," he had told her. Not because she had asked, but because he felt the need to say it. The need to make a promise he might actually keep. Straight from work, no stops. That's a guarantee. Mia looked at him across the table. 6 years old, but with something ancient in her expression. She nodded once. "Okay, Daddy," she said. "Not a question. Not you promise or for real this time. Just acceptance. The kind that broke something inside him, because it meant she had stopped expecting him to come through. And now, when he promised, she was just being polite. He had braided her hair himself that morning. 2 puffs. He'd learned to do them through a combination of YouTube tutorials and stubborn determination. She had sat still while he worked, her small body patient, waiting. He had made her lunch with care, turkey on wheat with no crust, apple slices, the little crackers she liked. He had done all of it like ritual, like these small acts of attention could somehow compensate for the bigger absences. Now at 3:47 a.m. with 6 hours and 43 minutes until he needed to be somewhere, Marcus made a decision. A decision that would change everything. He silenced his phone. He didn't turn it off. He didn't put it somewhere he couldn't see it. He simply pressed the button that would stop the notifications from interrupting his concentration. And he placed the phone face down on the table next to his laptop, out of sight, out of mind, just for a few hours while he solved the problem that was going to cost him his job if he didn't get it right. The numbers started to make sense around 4:15 a.m. A smaller vendor in Mexico, one they'd worked with before. Reliable. Faster shipping to the southern ports. If he could negotiate a premium for expedited processing. If he could coordinate with the client's warehouse for alternative receiving procedures. If he could present it all as a proactive solution rather than a problem. It might actually work. He worked through the darkness with single-minded focus. The kind of focus that came from a man who had learned that survival required sacrifice. He drafted emails. He researched freight costs. He pulled together contracts and timelines and contingencies, building a structure that would hold everything up even if one piece failed. By the time the sun came up, he had a presentation. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid. He showered quickly, changed into his work clothes, left a note for the neighbor who sometimes watched Mia. "I'll pick her up today. No need to hang around." He took pride in that, in not needing help, in managing it all himself. Single father, logistics coordinator, man who kept the lights on and his daughter in decent shoes. And somehow he believed that these things were the same as love. He arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m. His manager, Derek Stewart, was already there. Derek with his expensive watch. Derek with his assumptions about what ambitious people looked like, which generally meant they looked like him. Derek had gone to state school. Marcus had gone to community college. Derek had a wife who handled the home stuff. Marcus had silence and his own two hands. Derek had never seemed to question this balance, which said something about Derek. "You look like hell," Derek said when Marcus passed his desk. "Vendor emergency," Marcus replied, not stopping. "I've got a solution." The meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp. It was supposed to last an hour. It did not last an hour. The vendor company was represented by both their account manager and their procurement director. Two men who wanted to know why their supplier had failed, what the contingency plan was, whether Marcus's company could even be trusted to deliver on a contract. The questions kept coming, the implications getting sharper. This wasn't just about one missed shipment. This was about the entire relationship, the entire contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. At 1:58 p.m., Marcus silenced his phone before walking into the conference room. He set it face down on the table. The same intention. The same placement as at 3:47 a.m. Just for the meeting. Just until they resolved this crisis. He would check it when it was over. The meeting did not resolve by 3 p.m. as planned. By 3:30 p.m., Mia's school released students to the pickup line. By 3:35 p.m., the front office tried to call Marcus for the first time. The call went to voicemail. His phone was still face down on the conference table, still silenced, still promising him that he could focus on just this one thing. By 3:50 p.m., they called a second time. By 4:05 p.m., they called a third time. And when Marcus didn't answer, they sent a text to his emergency contact, his sister Carol, 2 states away. She didn't see it for another 30 minutes. She was in a meeting of her own, managing her own life, unable to reach back and catch the falling piece that was his daughter. Victoria Hartwell sat at the workstation outside the conference room. Her laptop was open to a quarterly business analysis, the kind that demanded her attention. The kind that demanded her attention in the way everything in her life demanded her attention. Urgently, competently, with the kind of focus that came naturally to someone who had learned early that her value was measured in solutions. She was 44 years old, white, and she had been a management consultant for 17 years. She worked for a firm that sent her to companies in crisis, companies that needed restructuring, companies that had stopped being profitable because they'd stopped being efficient. She was good at her job. She was excellent at her job, actually. She moved through offices like someone who understood the hidden architecture of how things worked, and people deferred to her because she had trained them to. Because deference was easier than excellence. She was not in the conference room with Marcus and the others. She was here because she'd been stationed at this branch office for 3 days, as an observer, analyzing the company's operations, writing a report that would eventually recommend whether they keep people like Marcus or find cheaper alternatives. She was here to watch and take notes and make judgments from a comfortable distance. The report she was working on was important. It would determine whether 5 people at this location kept their jobs, or whether they'd be consolidated with another branch. It was nothing personal. It was just numbers and efficiency. Victoria had taught herself a long time ago to keep the numbers separate from the people, and she'd gotten very good at maintaining that separation. She wasn't in the conference room, but she could hear the voices behind the glass, tense, technical, the sounds of men trying to solve a problem that was bigger than any of them. She'd worked with logistics before. She understood the pressure. She understood that one mistake could unravel a whole contract, and one lost contract could cascade into something catastrophic. She'd been at this company for 48 hours, and she'd already learned a great deal about Marcus Williams. She knew that he took his coffee without sugar. Black, usually in the morning when he thought no one was watching him, have his first quiet moment before the day started. She knew this because she watched people. It was part of her job, to observe patterns, to understand the choices people made when they thought no one was looking. Those choices revealed the real person, the one underneath the professional performance. She knew that he kept a photograph of his daughter taped to the inside of his desk drawer, rather than displaying it on top like the other men did. She'd seen it once when she was looking for a file. A little black girl with serious eyes, maybe 6 years old, maybe younger. The photo was worn from being looked at frequently. It was private, hidden. The kind of thing someone kept close when they didn't know how to talk about love. When love felt too vulnerable to display openly, she knew that he never complained. Not once in 48 hours had she heard him complain about the workload, the budget constraints, anything. She'd come to recognize this silence as a warning sign. Complaining was how people let pressure escape. When someone never complained, it meant the pressure was building up inside them, compressing, getting ready to blow. She knew other things too, small fragments that had slipped through in casual conversation. The reading program his daughter attended on Saturdays. The backpack she'd chosen with a small embroidered fox on the front flap. The way his voice changed. Just slightly. Just enough that someone who was paying attention would notice. When he described how his daughter sounded when she was trying not to cry, Victoria had been trained to notice these things. It was her job to notice the small truths that people revealed despite themselves. But somewhere over the past 48 hours, she'd moved from noticing him professionally to noticing him as a person. And that shift troubled her in a way she wasn't willing to examine too closely. At 2:45 p.m., Marcus's phone started buzzing on the desk outside the conference room. It buzzed at 2:47 p.m. It buzzed again at 2:49 p.m. Victoria looked at the phone. She could see the screen lighting up from 3 feet away. She could see the same number appearing again and again. Franklin Elementary. That was where his daughter went to school. She knew this. She'd heard him mention it to someone on the phone a week ago. His voice careful, making sure he had the right pickup time, the right procedure. She did not pick up his phone. She knew better than to cross that boundary. She went back to her spreadsheet. But at 3:15 p.m., when the fourth call came through, when she could see the text preview appear on the screen without even trying to read it. "This is Franklin Elementary. Sophie has not been picked up. Please contact us immediately." Something shifted inside her. Victoria sat with that information for exactly 17 seconds. Then she picked up her keys. She didn't leave a note. She didn't tell anyone she was stepping out. She didn't alert the meeting. She didn't wait for permission. She simply understood that something had broken, that a child was alone somewhere, and that the only person who could fix it in that moment was her. She drove to Franklin Elementary in 11 minutes. The traffic would normally have made it a 17-minute drive. But Victoria had learned long ago how to move through the world with focused intention, the kind of intention that opened doors, that made traffic lights turn green, that communicated to everyone around her that she was not stopping for anything. She was a woman who had built her entire existence on the principle that if you moved with enough confidence, the world would get out of your way. The school was in the process of locking down. Office staff were making calls. Parents were arriving in scattered panic. And there, sitting on a bench near the flagpole, was Marcus's daughter. She was not crying. Victoria had half expected tears, and the absence of them was somehow worse. The little girl was sitting with her legs dangling off the edge of the bench, a cracker in one hand, her backpack still on her shoulders, as if she was ready to leave at a moment's notice. She had been waiting for a long time, long enough that she had stopped being scared, long enough that she had moved into some other territory, the territory of a child who had learned that hope was expensive and therefore something to be carefully rationed. Victoria approached slowly. She didn't kneel down. She didn't perform comfort. She didn't offer big gestures. She simply sat beside the girl on the bench, leaving exactly enough space that the child could choose whether to lean in or pull away. "Hi," Victoria said. "I'm Victoria. I work with your dad." The girl looked at her with eyes that were far too old for a 6-year-old face. "Is he coming?" she asked. "He is," Victoria said. "He didn't know you were waiting. But he's coming, I promise." They sat together in the quiet. Victoria learned that the girl's name was Mia, not Sophie. She'd gotten that wrong. And that Mia liked the crackers from the organic snack company, and that she was reading a book series about animals, and that she had learned to be very still when she was waiting for something. Like stillness might help the waiting go faster. Victoria learned these things because she asked questions, and because she listened to the answers with full attention. With the kind of attention that came from someone who understood that you couldn't learn about a person unless you were willing to actually pay attention to them. She spoke in a low, easy voice, the kind of voice that didn't demand anything. She didn't try to cheer Mia up. She didn't convince her that everything was fine. She just sat beside her and existed in the same space. And she let the girl decide how much she wanted to share. Mia leaned into her side after about 40 minutes. It was a small thing. Just a slight tilt of a small body toward a source of warmth. It lasted for less than a minute before Mia pulled back, as if she was checking whether she was allowed to do that, whether this stranger would accept such contact. Victoria didn't pull away. She kept her arm loosely along the back of the bench, still not demanding, still not pushing. "My dad is coming," Mia said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, but one that contained a question underneath it. "Isn't he?" "Yes," Victoria said. "He is." Marcus's hands were shaking when he pulled into the school parking lot at 4:55 p.m. 85 minutes. 85 minutes after school released. 70 minutes after the office had stopped calling, and he didn't know any of it yet. He didn't know because his phone was still face down on the conference table where he'd left it. Still silenced. Still separate from him like it belonged to someone else entirely. He'd walked out of the meeting at 4:40 p.m. because his manager had said good work and waved him away. And Marcus had checked his phone then. Just a quick glance, and saw the chaos of missed calls and one text from his sister. "The school is trying to reach you about Mia. I'm in a meeting. I can't reach them back yet." He'd driven the 15 minutes in 11, running 2 red lights, his entire body moving faster than his mind could process what was happening. All he could think was Mia, alone, waiting. He pushed through the front gate, his apology already forming, already rehearsed. "I'm sorry, baby. Daddy got stuck. It won't happen again." He'd said that before. He'd broken that promise before. But he said it now anyway. Running the words over and over in his head as he came around the corner of the main building. And then he stopped moving. Mia was sitting on a bench near the flagpole, exactly where she was supposed to be, exactly where she would have been taught to wait if a parent didn't pick her up on time. She had her backpack on. She had a cracker in her hand. She looked very small, but she wasn't alone. There was a woman sitting beside her. A white woman. Professional. Composed. With her arm loosely along the back of the bench in a gesture that contained so much gentleness that Marcus felt something crack inside his chest just looking at it. The woman was Victoria Hartwell. Marcus recognized her immediately. She'd been at the office for 3 days. He'd seen her in the hallways, seen the way people responded to her, the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room, because she had that quality, the quality of someone who mattered. She was the consultant from corporate, She was the woman who was at his company for a reason that probably had nothing to do with helping anyone, and everything to do with analyzing whether they were worth keeping around. And she was sitting beside his daughter. Marcus stood at the corner of the building and could not move. What he saw wasn't desperation. It wasn't Mia panicked or crying or afraid. What he saw was his daughter, his 6-year-old daughter, leaning into the side of a woman who was not her father. And the lean contained everything he needed to know about what had happened in his absence. It wasn't physical panic. It was something worse. It was surrender. Mia had stopped hoping that her father would come on time, so she had adjusted. She had learned to be still. She had learned to find comfort in someone else's presence. She had learned at 6 years old, while her father was in a conference room trying to save a contract, that there were other people in the world who could provide what she needed. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. And there it was. The financial news alert that he'd set up months ago because her company had a contract tied to the city grid he maintained. The alert was showing him Victoria's face, her company name, a headline about a $400 million merger. Claire. No, not Claire. Victoria. Victoria Hartwell, CEO of Corporate Consulting. Victoria, who was currently sitting beside his daughter. The weight of understanding crashed down on him. This wasn't some nice colleague who happened to be in the right place. This was a powerful woman from corporate headquarters. This was someone who had access to information about whether he kept his job. This was someone who had seen in the starkest possible way that he couldn't manage the basic responsibility of picking up his own daughter. Victoria looked up then. Her eyes found his across the parking lot, and he saw the moment she understood that he understood what she was. She didn't look away. She didn't soften her expression. She didn't offer him comfort. She just held his gaze with the steady regard of someone who had seen something true, and was waiting to see what he would do with that knowledge. Mia's head turned, following the direction of Victoria's gaze. Her small face transformed. Relief flooded through her. But underneath the relief was something else. Confusion, maybe. The confusion of a child who didn't know whether to trust hope yet. Marcus forced his legs to move. He walked toward them across the parking lot, toward the daughter who had learned to wait, toward the stranger who had sat beside her, toward the moment that would unravel everything he thought he understood about himself. Marcus didn't know what to say when they reached the car. Victoria had stood as he approached, had introduced herself with a handshake that was completely professional, completely polite, with no acknowledgement of the fact that she'd been sitting with his daughter while he was trapped in a meeting. She'd told him that Mia was safe, that the school had called her office when they couldn't reach him, that she was glad she could help. All of it was true. All of it was a performance. He'd taken Mia's hand, and her small fingers had held tight to his in a way that would have broken his heart if he wasn't already in pieces. He'd thanked Victoria, and she'd given him a nod. And then he'd driven home in silence while Mia sat in her car seat and didn't talk to him, just watched the window, and occasionally ate the crackers that Victoria had somehow produced from her own purse. He'd made dinner. He'd gone through the routines. He'd tucked Mia into bed and checked on her 3 times because he couldn't believe she was actually asleep, couldn't believe she was safe, couldn't shake the image of her leaning into Victoria's side. At 9:47 p.m., when Mia was definitely asleep, when there was no possibility of her overhearing, Victoria called. She didn't text. She called, which meant this was important, which meant she wasn't going to let him hide behind the safety of written words. Marcus almost didn't answer. He thought about letting it go to voicemail, about buying himself more time before he had to face whatever this conversation was going to be. But he picked up. "Hello," he said, and even to his own ears his voice sounded wrong. Too small, too defeated. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. She didn't start with pleasantries. She didn't ask how he was doing. She didn't ask whether Mia had settled down okay. She got straight to the point with the kind of directness that only came naturally to people who'd spent their entire lives not having to soften their words for anyone. When your daughter was waiting for you, she asked her teacher whether I knew about the winter showcase. Do you know what that means? Marcus couldn't speak. It means, Victoria continued, her voice steady and precise, that she wasn't sure you knew about it. She was asking me because she thought maybe if she reached out to someone at your work, someone you might have mentioned it to, she could at least try to find another solution. She was 6 years old, and she was already building contingency plans because her father had failed her too many times to leave anything to chance. I know, Marcus said. The words came out broken. I know I was late. The meeting ran over and I silenced my phone and I didn't. I'm not calling to make you feel worse about it, Victoria interrupted. I'm not calling to shame you. I'm calling because someone has to say this out loud, and right now that someone is me. She took a breath. You are not a bad father, but you are an absent one, and your daughter has already learned how to survive that absence. That's the part that matters. The silence between them was enormous. I was trying. Marcus started. I know what you were trying to do, Victoria said. You were trying to keep your job. You were trying to provide. You were trying to solve a problem at work. I'm not arguing with your intentions. I'm telling you what your daughter experienced while you were doing all that trying. She experienced abandonment, and she responded by learning to not need you. The words landed like they were designed to. Not cruel, but truthful in a way that cruelty wouldn't have been. Marcus found that he couldn't argue with them. He couldn't defend himself, because there was nothing to defend. The facts were clear. His daughter had been waiting. He had not come. A stranger had sat beside her instead. What do you want from me? He asked, and the question came out raw. I want you to understand what happened today, Victoria said. Not in your head where you can rationalize it and turn it into a story about being a good provider who made one mistake, but in a place deeper than that. I want you to understand what it cost your daughter to learn to be okay with waiting for you. I'm restructuring my schedule, Marcus said. The decision came fully formed, as if some part of him had already made it while the rest of him was still in shock. I'm going to call my manager tomorrow. I'm taking a step back. I'm picking Mia up every day at 3:15, and I'm not working late unless there's an actual emergency. That's good, Victoria said. But her voice didn't soften. But I need you to understand that schedule changes don't fix the problem. The problem isn't your hours. The problem is that you've built a philosophy of parenting around providing and showing up financially, and you've somehow convinced yourself that those things are the same as being present. They're not. Presence is something else entirely. It's harder. It's less measurable, and it requires you to want it more than you want anything else. I do want it, Marcus said. You want to believe you want it, Victoria corrected. But want and actually doing are different things. I'll stay involved if you're serious about this, but I'm not going to be the person who sits with your daughter while you work late. That's not my responsibility. That's yours. She hung up before he could respond, and Marcus sat in the darkness of his living room with the phone still pressed to his ear, understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Victoria Hartwell wasn't going to let him perform his way out of this. She wasn't going to comfort him. She wasn't going to tell him it would be okay. She was going to hold him accountable, and somehow that felt more important than any sympathy could have been. The next morning, Marcus called his manager, Derek Stewart. His manager was not happy about the schedule change. You're stepping back from the Miller account, Derek said, sitting in his office with the door closed. Derek's office had windows on 2 sides, and air conditioning that worked better than anywhere else in the building. Derek's office was a reminder that some people's work was valued more than others. That's one of our biggest accounts. I need the flexibility, Marcus said. He had rehearsed this, had tried to make it sound professional and reasonable. I can continue doing logistics analysis and coordination, but I need to leave at 3:15 every day. It's non-negotiable. Because of your daughter, Derek said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, and the way he said it contained a judgment, a belief that family obligations were things that weak people used as excuses. "Yes," Marcus said. "You know what this looks like, right?" Derek leaned back in his chair. "It looks like you're not serious about moving up. It looks like you're choosing daycare over your career." "It's not daycare," Marcus said. "It's my daughter. I get it. But companies don't promote people who aren't willing to make sacrifices, and the biggest sacrifice is always the personal stuff." Derek spread his hands like he was just stating facts. "I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you how the world works. You want to keep your daughter. That's great. But every hour you spend picking her up instead of working late is an hour you're not using to build yourself." Marcus didn't argue. He'd learned a long time ago that arguing with Derek was like arguing with gravity. Derek had a worldview that made sense to him, and it was one where family was a liability, where love was measured in sacrifice, but where only the right kind of sacrifice mattered, the kind that benefited your career. He restructured his work anyway. The money was tighter. He'd known it would be. The freelance consulting he'd taken on the side was less stable than the full-time hours had been. But the first day he picked Mia up at 3:15 p.m. sharp when she walked out of the school doors and immediately looked for him. Instead of preparing herself for disappointment, something shifted inside him. She didn't run. She walked toward the car with careful steps, like she was testing whether this punctuality was real or another performance that would be withdrawn as soon as she got comfortable. Marcus opened the door before she reached it, and she climbed in, and they drove home in silence. Because he didn't know what to say, and she didn't know whether it was safe to hope yet. That night Marcus sat beside her bed and asked her about her day, really asked. Not just the surface questions like how was school, but the deeper ones. What did she learn? What made her happy? What made her scared? The drain, she said very quietly. The bathtub drain still scares me. Marcus felt something break open inside him. She'd been afraid of something for how long, and he hadn't known. Because he wasn't there to notice, because presence requires attention, and attention requires time. "Tell me about it," he said, and he sat on the bathroom floor the next day while she took her bath. And he explained how drains worked, what pipes they connected to, where the water went. She listened seriously, her small hands gripping the edges of the tub. And when he finished, she said, "I still don't love it, but I understand it better now." "That's all anyone can ask," he told her, "to understand the things that scare them a little better." The Saturday before the winter showcase, Mia mentioned a song. She'd heard it at this grocery store. Neither of them could remember the artist or the title, just a few notes and a feeling. Marcus had an idea. He pulled up his playlist on his laptop, and they spent 3 evenings together, just the two of them, going through songs one at a time, while Mia listened carefully to each one. On the 4th try, she said, "That one." They added it to a new playlist that Marcus labeled Mia's. Just that simple. Just a playlist with a name that claimed her, acknowledged her, made room for her preferences in his digital life. He apologized twice more that week. Once for being late when he should have been on time. Once for missing her soccer practice when she was 6, and he was still trying to understand how to be both a provider and a parent. He didn't make excuses. He just said, "I'm sorry I was late." "You shouldn't have had to wait." Each time, Mia's small face shifted slightly, like she was trying to decide whether forgiveness was something she was allowed to give, whether trust was something she could risk again. Meanwhile, Victoria maintained her distance. They would see each other briefly at the office. She would nod at him in the hallway. Once he brought her a coffee. Not because he was trying to win her approval, but because he'd noticed that she took hers black, no sugar. And it was a small act of paying attention, and she accepted it with a simple, "Thank you," and nothing more. But on Friday night, the day before the winter showcase, Victoria called again. "Mia asked me something today," she said without preamble. She came to my desk and asked whether I knew about the showcase. She wanted to know if you'd mentioned it to me in case Victoria paused. In case you forgot again. Marcus felt the words like a punch. She's still building contingencies, Victoria continued, because she hasn't decided yet whether she can trust you. And that's okay. Trust isn't something you rebuild in a week. But I want you to understand that every day you show up on time is like a vote for her to slowly, very slowly start believing in you again. I understand, Marcus said. Do you? Victoria asked. Or do you understand it intellectually, but not in the part of you that actually drives decisions, because there's a difference. Anyone can promise to show up. The question is whether you'll keep showing up when it's hard, when you're tired, when someone at work is disappointed in you, when the sacrifice feels like more than you can bear. I will, Marcus said. I promise. Don't promise me, Victoria said. Promise your daughter. She hung up, and Marcus went to Mia's room where she was sleeping, and he stood beside her bed for a long time, looking at her small face, understanding the weight of what he'd taken for granted, understanding that this was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done. Being present, not financially present, actually, physically, emotionally present. It would require giving up things. It would require being less impressive at work. It would require accepting that Derek Stewart and people like him would see him as weak, as someone who'd chosen family over ambition. It would require redefining what ambition meant. He was ready to do all of that. He was ready finally to understand that presence wasn't something you could provide incidentally. It was the entire point. Victoria Hartwell had built her entire adult life on the principle of maintaining distance. She moved through the world as an observer, not a participant. She watched companies analyze their problems, recommended solutions, and then left before the consequences of those solutions became visible. She kept people at arm's length, because proximity created expectation, and expectation created the possibility of disappointment. She was good at it. She'd been doing it for 17 years, and she'd never once made the mistake of letting someone matter enough to hurt her. Then she sat on a bench outside an elementary school and held the hand of a 6-year-old girl while her father forgot to come home. And something inside the carefully constructed walls of her professional distance began to crack. She didn't even fully understand why she'd left the meeting. It was unprofessional. It violated protocol. She was at this company in an official capacity, and stepping out to help a child was not part of that capacity. And yet she'd done it without hesitation, which meant something inside her, something she'd worked very hard to suppress, was responding to Mia's situation with an urgency that bypassed all her carefully constructed logic. She analyzed this feeling like she analyzed everything, methodically, clinically, trying to understand the mechanism. What she found was uncomfortable. What she found was that Mia looked like she had looked once, many years ago, sitting on a bench in elementary school, waiting for her mother to pick her up from school, waiting for 2 hours, waiting long enough that the teachers started packing up, that the janitor came with his keys, that she had to go sit in the office and call her mother, who wasn't available, who had decided that her own ambitions were more important than punctuality. Victoria had survived that moment. She'd gone home and made herself dinner. She'd done her homework. She'd learned very early that adults couldn't be depended on, and that it was better to depend on yourself. By the time she was 18, she'd turned that lesson into her entire philosophy. Never need anyone. Never depend on anyone. Never let someone's absence hurt you, because you shouldn't have expected them to show up in the first place. But watching Mia, observing Marcus's response, seeing the slow rebuilding of trust over days and weeks, Victoria was forced to confront a possibility that she'd spent her entire adult life running from. What if the lesson wasn't that people couldn't be depended on? What if the lesson was that most people had been taught they didn't have to show up, and they accepted that teaching as truth? And what if someone like Marcus, someone who was genuinely trying, genuinely changing, genuinely recognizing that his daughter needed presence more than provision. What if that person was worth the risk of mattering? She didn't call him for the sake of calling him. She called him because Mia needed him to understand what he'd done, and because someone had to make sure he didn't drift back into old patterns. She called him with her professional voice, with the kind of directness that came naturally to her, with the boundaries intact and the distance maintained. But the boundaries were getting thinner. The distance was getting smaller. She noticed things about him over the following weeks. She noticed that he brought a new lunch every day: turkey on wheat with apple slices, the ingredients purchased with care, assembled with intention. She noticed that he mentioned Mia differently now, not with the guilt-tinged pride of someone who was providing, but with genuine interest in who she was becoming. She noticed that he moved differently at work. He was present from 9 a.m. to 3:15 p.m., fully engaged, and then at 3:15 he simply left. No apologizing, no explanation, just a clean exit, because his daughter was waiting. It was the most radical thing she'd ever seen someone do in a corporate environment, choosing something other than the job and not treating it like a tragedy. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the bench incident, Marcus brought 2 coffees into the office. He set one on her desk without asking. Black. No sugar. He'd noticed how she drank her coffee. Victoria picked it up and said, "Thank you," and nothing more. But inside, something shifted. That act of noticing, of paying attention to someone else's small preference, that was more intimate than she'd allowed anyone to be in years. She was scared of him, she realized. Not of him as a person, but of what he represented. He was proving that change was possible, that someone could recognize their failure and actually do something about it. That presence could be chosen even when it was harder than the alternative. She was scared because she'd built her entire identity around the opposite belief: that people couldn't change, that effort was wasted, that it was better to rely on yourself and no one else. But Mia's slow reemergence of trust was like watching a plant grow toward light, and Victoria understood in a way that terrified her that she was the one blocking out the light in her own life. She was the one choosing distance. She was the one maintaining the boundaries because she was too afraid to risk what would happen if she let someone actually matter. At night, alone in her hotel room, Victoria would think about Mia's small hand in hers, the weight of that small trust. She would think about Marcus's face when he realized what he'd done, the genuine remorse, the genuine commitment to fix it. She would think about what it would mean to let someone like that matter, to risk being disappointed, to choose presence instead of protection. She hadn't come to any conclusions yet, but she was starting to understand that some walls, once you started to notice the cracks, were impossible to maintain. The winter showcase was scheduled for 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. It was being held in the same multi-purpose room where Marcus had once forgotten Mia was there, the same space that contained both the memory of his failure and the possibility of his redemption. Mia had been practicing her lines for 3 weeks. She had 4 lines of dialogue in a winter play that had been written by the 3rd-grade teachers. She played a snowflake, which was somehow perfect, small, intricate, beautiful in her smallness. Marcus arrived at 2:47 p.m. He was early for the first time in his life, and the earliness felt important. It felt like a statement. I am choosing to be here. I am choosing to have room for anything to go wrong and still be present. He sat in the multi-purpose room with 30 other parents, all of them there to watch their children perform. Some of them were on their phones, some of them were working. Actually working. During their children's performances, Marcus turned his phone off. Not silenced. Off. He didn't want the temptation. He didn't want the possibility of distraction. Mia came out for the last performance of the day. The winter play was relegated to the final slot, because it was the least prestigious event. She was wearing a white costume that was supposed to represent a snowflake, and she had her father's serious expression, and her mother's cheekbones, and she looked so small under the stage lights that Marcus had to breathe very carefully to keep from being overwhelmed. He found her eyes in the audience immediately. She was looking for him. He was there. And she found him. And her small face transformed when she realized that he was present. Victoria walked in just as the play was starting. She was carrying 2 hot chocolates, one regular, one with extra cream. The extra cream was for Mia. Victoria had somehow learned this detail through her time watching them. She stood at the back of the multi-purpose room, having arrived at the last possible moment, observing the scene the way she observed everything. Her eyes found Marcus, and they held for just a moment. She didn't smile. She simply acknowledged his presence with a nod. One small tilt of her head that said, "You came?" "Good." Mia delivered her lines perfectly. She said, "When winter comes, the snow falls like magic, and we all melt eventually, but not before we shine. And the cold makes us beautiful in ways the warmth never could." She said them with perfect diction, perfect timing, and her eyes kept finding Marcus in the audience, checking to make sure he was still there, that he was still paying attention. When the play ended, there was applause. Parents stood up. Mia took her bow, a small, uncertain bow because she was only 6 and bowing was still new. And then she looked directly at her father, and her face said everything. "You came. You stayed. You watched me." Victoria handed Mia her hot chocolate after the performance ended, and Mia took it like she was still testing whether Victoria was real, whether this presence was sustainable. The 3 of them stood together near the exit of the multi-purpose room, Marcus and Victoria and Mia, and no one would have known from looking at them that there was anything unusual about the configuration, that this was not a traditional family arrangement, that this had all started with a failure and a stranger showing up. "You were incredible," Marcus told Mia. And he meant it with a depth of genuine pride that had nothing to do with what she'd accomplished, and everything to do with the fact that he had been there to witness it. "We should get coffee," Victoria said very calmly, as if she was suggesting something simple and routine. "The 3 of us. There's a place down the street," so they went to get coffee. And Marcus and Victoria sat across from each other while Mia drank hot chocolate and looked between them with the careful observation of a child who was trying to understand what was happening. At the coffee shop, Victoria ordered an Americano. Marcus ordered tea. Mia got her hot chocolate refilled, and they sat at a corner table while the afternoon light moved across the surface of their drinks. "I need to ask you something," Victoria said, and her voice had the tone of someone about to say something important. "Are you doing this for Mia, or are you doing this because you're afraid of losing her?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked at his tea like the answer might be somewhere in the steam rising from the cup. "Both," he said finally. "I'm doing it for her because she deserves it. But I'm also doing it because I'm terrified that if I slip back into old patterns, she's going to close off completely. She's going to learn that I'm not trustworthy, and that's going to be a lesson she carries her whole life." "Okay," Victoria said. She didn't soften. She didn't offer comfort. "The reason I'm asking is because fear is unstable. Fear changes. You might be afraid today, but in 6 months, you might not be afraid anymore. The job might get easier, or you might get a promotion, or you might just get complacent again. So I need to know whether you're going to keep showing up when you're not scared anymore." "I don't know," Marcus said, and the honesty of it was painful. "I don't know if I can promise that. I can promise that I'm going to try. But I can't promise that fear will keep me doing the right thing forever." Victoria nodded, and something in her face shifted slightly. "That's the most honest thing you could have said. Because fear doesn't last. Eventually, you stop being scared of losing something and you just accept the loss as probable. So the question becomes, are you going to keep showing up because you actually want to be present or because you're trying to prevent disaster?" "I want to be present," Marcus said. I'm starting to understand that being present is its own reward. Does that make sense? It makes sense, Victoria said. But talk is easy. Action is hard. And you need to understand that every day you're not here every time you're late. Every moment you're distant. That's a vote in her mind that you don't actually want this. That you were just scared for a while and now the fear has worn off. She took a sip of her coffee. Mia was very quiet, watching the exchange between the two adults like she was memorizing something important. I think I'm going to step back even more, Marcus said. I'm going to take on freelance work instead of working full-time. It's less money, less stability, but more flexibility. I want to be able to come home at 3:15 and actually have time with Mia before bedtime. I want to help with homework. I want to know what's happening in her life instead of hearing about it in fragments. That's going to cost you, Victoria said, and she said it like she understood the cost, like she was acknowledging that he was making a real sacrifice. Your co-workers are going to see you as less ambitious. You're going to make less money. You might not get promotions. You're going to watch people like Derek, like the people who stay late and prove their dedication, move up past you. I know, Marcus said, and you're okay with that. I'm learning to be okay with that, Marcus said, because the alternative is having a daughter who doesn't trust me, and that seems like a worse cost. Victoria was very still for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. I need to tell you something, she said, and her voice was different now, less professional, more vulnerable. My mother was like Derek. She believed that ambition was the most important thing. She believed that showing up for family was fine as long as it didn't interfere with her career. And when it came down to a choice between a school event and a business meeting, she always chose the business meeting. She paused. Mia was watching her very carefully. I became someone who never needs anything, Victoria continued, because needing people is what gets you hurt. When you need someone to show up for you and they don't, that's a particular kind of pain. So I learned not to need. I learned to be self-sufficient. And I've built my entire adult life around proving that I don't need anyone. But you did show up for Mia, Marcus said quietly. Yes, Victoria said, and that bothers me because it means something is changing. It means I'm starting to risk needing people again, and that's terrifying. She looked at Mia, and there was something in her expression that was unguarded. Your daughter reminds me of myself, except she still has time. She still has a father who's realizing that he needs to show up. And I think, Victoria paused, I think I might be okay risking that, risking needing both of you. The words hung in the air between them like something fragile. What are you saying? Marcus asked. I'm saying that I'm not just observing anymore, Victoria said. I'm choosing to stay involved, not because I'm evaluating you anymore, but because I want to. Derek Stewart saw Marcus and Victoria together at a restaurant 2 weeks later. Derek was there with his wife, and they were celebrating something. Derek's promotion, probably. Derek always had something to celebrate. He was the kind of person who moved through life with unconscious entitlement, believing that success was the natural outcome of the right choices, that failure was always someone else's fault. Derek noticed Marcus immediately, and he noticed Victoria. And Derek, in the way of people who'd been wounded by someone else's success, in the way of people who resented Marcus for leaving a job to be a father instead of staying late to prove his worth, decided to do something unkind. He came over to their table, pulled out a chair, and said, So, this is what it looks like when you abandon your career. Marcus tensed. Victoria remained perfectly still. I know her, Derek said, pointing at Victoria with the kind of familiarity he absolutely did not have. She was at the office for 3 weeks. Corporate consultant. I remember because you looked like you were going to fall over yourself trying to impress her. Victoria's expression didn't change. Marcus here, Derek continued, decided that being a single dad was more important than actually doing anything with his life. I respect that in a way, but I also think it's sad. I think it's a waste. He could have been something. And instead, Derek gestured vaguely at the two of them. Derek, Marcus said quietly, "You should go back to your table." But Derek didn't go. Derek went on, "You know what I think? I think he's using you. I think he realized he couldn't cut it professionally, so he pivoted to finding some corporate woman to, I don't know, validate his choices. Give him permission to fail." Victoria stood up. She was calm, but her voice carried a weight that stopped Derek mid-sentence. "You should go back to your table," she said. She had the advantage of being someone who'd spent her entire career intimidating people like Derek. "You should go back to your table and you should not speak to or about this man again. Is that clear?" Derek left, but the damage was done. Word got back to the office. People started talking. The narrative became Marcus was dating someone from corporate, which was why he'd been allowed to leave early, which was why he was suddenly less visible at work, which was why Derek had been promoted ahead of him. The narrative became about connections and favoritism rather than about a father choosing his daughter. Worse, the narrative reached Mia. A classmate of hers, a girl whose mother worked in the building where Marcus had shifted to freelance work, had overheard adults talking about Marcus's scandal. She'd come home and told her daughter that Mia's father was bad at his job, that he couldn't even keep a job, that he was slumming with some corporate woman. Mia heard all of this in the careful way that children hear things. Not directly, but in fragments, in the silences between words, in the way the other girl was looking at her while she said it. For 3 days, Mia didn't talk to Marcus. She answered his questions in one-word responses. She didn't ask for help braiding her hair anymore. She did it herself in front of the mirror, her small fingers working the strands clumsily, refusing assistance. On the 4th day, when Marcus picked her up from school, she was standing at the gate with her arms wrapped around herself. And she looked small in a way that broke his heart. "Mia." "What happened?" he asked. "Did I do something?" She looked at him with eyes that were too old for a 6-year-old face. Emma said, "You're bad at your job," she said quietly. "She said you can't take care of me. She said I'm bad for your career." The weight of understanding crashed down on him. His daughter had internalized shame that wasn't hers to carry. She'd absorbed the judgment of people who didn't understand her father. People who saw his choice to be present as a failure rather than a victory. "Emma is wrong," Marcus said firmly. "And I need to talk to her mother about saying things like that. But more importantly, I need you to understand something. You are not bad for my career. You are not a burden. You're the most important thing in my life. And I'm making choices about work not because I'm failing at it, but because being your father is more important to me than anything anyone at an office could ever say about me." Mia didn't cry, she just nodded. But her small shoulders carried the weight of understanding that sometimes being connected to someone you love means also being connected to the judgments that people make about them. The shame that Mia internalized was quiet and thorough. She stopped asking Marcus questions. She stopped volunteering information about her day. She would come home from school and go directly to her room. Not angry, just withdrawn in a way that was somehow worse than anger would have been. Marcus sat with her several times trying to reach her, trying to understand what was happening behind her composed exterior. But Mia had learned very early that silence was a form of protection. She'd learned that if she didn't ask for anything, she couldn't disappoint anyone by needing them. It took him until Saturday morning to understand what was really happening. He found her in the bathroom, in front of the mirror, trying to do her hair herself. Her attempts at braiding were messy, imperfect, and she was getting frustrated, her small fingers not cooperating, her eyes filling with tears that she was trying to suppress. "Can I help?" Marcus asked gently. "No," she said very quietly. "I can do it myself." "I know you can," Marcus said. "But I would like to help you. Would that be okay?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Is it because I'm a problem? Is that why you're not working as much? Because I'm bad for your job?" Marcus felt the full weight of what Derek's words filtered through. Emma's repetition, filtered through the casual cruelty of people who didn't understand, had done to his daughter. He sat on the floor beside her while she was still sitting at the table, while they were eye level. "You are not a problem," he said. "You are the reason I'm making different choices about work. But not because you're bad, because you're important. Because being your father is the most important job I have, and I want to do it well. I want to be there for you. I want to know about your day. I want to help you with your hair when you need help. And that's not because you're a burden. That's because I love you." But Derek said Mia started. And then she stopped herself. "No, Emma said that Derek said that you're not as good at your job as other people." "That might be true," Marcus said. And honesty seemed important here. "I might not be as impressive at my job now as I could be if I was staying late every night. But I made a choice. I chose to be present for you instead of chasing promotions. And I'm okay with that choice." "Are you sure?" Mia asked. She looked like she was carrying an impossible weight. The weight of being responsible for her father's choices, for understanding that loving her had cost him something. "Yes," Marcus said. "I'm very sure." She let him braid her hair then, 2 puffs with precision, the way he'd learned to do it over the months of daily practice. And while he was working, she said, "Is Victoria your friend?" "Yes," Marcus said. "She's my friend." "Is she more than your friend?" Mia asked with the directness of a child who understood instinctively that some conversations required brutal honesty. Marcus paused. "I think maybe she's becoming something more than that. But I want to make sure you're okay with that. Because you matter more than anything." "She was nice to me that day," Mia said, "when you forgot to pick me up." "She was very nice to you," Marcus said, "and I'm very grateful for that." "I think she might be sad, though," Mia said. "I think she might be sad about things that happened before me, before us." It was such an adult observation coming from a 6-year-old mouth that Marcus nearly wept. Monday morning, Marcus went to the office building where Derek worked. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up. Derek was in a meeting. So Marcus waited in the lobby, surrounded by the trappings of corporate success, the sleek furniture, the art on the walls, the sense that this was a place where important decisions were made. He understood waiting there that the decisions being made in this building had real consequences for people like him, people like Mia, people who depended on the good judgment of people like Derek. When Derek finally emerged from his meeting, Marcus was waiting. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," Derek replied, already turning away. Marcus stepped in front of him. "You told someone, or you let someone tell other people that I'm bad at my job because I'm prioritizing my daughter. And that word got back to my daughter, and she's now carrying shame about being the reason I've made different choices about my career." Marcus Derek started. "You don't get to decide whether being a father is a priority," Marcus said. And his voice was very steady. "And you don't get to put your bitterness on my daughter. I don't care what you think about my career choices. I don't care that you think I'm wasting potential or whatever narrative you've built around the fact that I'm not as available as I used to be. But you don't get to use my child as a casualty in whatever war you're fighting against me." "I didn't say anything about your daughter," Derek said. "No, you said things about me knowing they would get back to my daughter," Marcus said, "and that's worse. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop talking about me and my family. You're going to let this go. And if I hear that you've said anything else about us, I'm going to file a formal complaint with HR about you creating a hostile work environment and spreading false information about my character." Marcus left before Derek could respond. He wasn't trying to be tough or intimidating. He was just finally drawing a line. He was finally saying out loud that his choices were his own, and that defending them required nothing more than standing still and refusing to accept judgment from someone who didn't understand what mattered. Then he went to HR and filed a formal report. Not for revenge, for protection. He needed to create a paper trail, a documented record that Derek had been spreading information about his family, so that if anything worse happened, if it affected his ability to get work, if it came up in any context that mattered, there would be a record that he'd stood up to it, that he'd tried to stop it, that he wasn't accepting this as normal workplace behavior. The HR representative, a woman named Susan who'd been kind to him when he transitioned to freelance work, listened to his account carefully. "I hear you," she said, "and I want to document this. But I also want you to know that what you're doing, prioritizing your daughter being willing to make career sacrifices for her, that's not something we see very often. And it's not weakness, it's strength." "That's not how Derek sees it," Marcus said. "Derek is threatened by it," Susan said, "because Derek's entire identity is built on the idea that career is everything. And if you're proof that people can make different choices and still be okay, that's a threat to the whole system he's built." That evening, Marcus called Victoria. "I need to tell you what happened," Marcus said. And he explained everything. Derek at the restaurant. The words filtering back to Mia. The shame his daughter had internalized. Victoria was quiet while he spoke. "I handled it," Marcus continued. "I told Derek to stop and I filed a formal report with HR. I'm not expecting that to do anything, but I needed Mia to see that I was willing to stand up for her, to fight for her, even against someone who has more power in traditional hierarchies." "What did Mia say?" Victoria asked. "She understood," Marcus said. "She understood that I was choosing her. And then..." He paused. "Then she asked me if you were my friend. And then she asked if you were more than my friend." He heard Victoria take a breath. "What did you tell her?" Victoria asked. "I told her the truth," Marcus said. "That I think you're becoming something more than that, but that I wanted to make sure she was okay with it, because she comes first." "She should," Victoria said, and something in her voice had shifted. "She should absolutely come first." "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Why did you help Mia that day?" "Really? Because I've been thinking about it and it wasn't professional. It wasn't part of your job. There's no logical reason for a corporate consultant to leave a meeting to sit with a stranger's daughter." Victoria took a long time to answer. "Because I needed someone to do that for me once," she said finally. "When I was her age. Someone just sat with me. Someone didn't try to fix it or cheer me up. Someone just existed in the same space and made me feel like I wasn't alone. And nobody ever did that for me, and I realized that I could do that for someone else." Victoria Marcus started. "Let me finish," she said. "I've built my entire life around not needing people because I learned very early that people don't come through. But watching you actually change, actually show up, actually reorganize your entire life around being present for your daughter, that's showing me something different. That's showing me that maybe not all people are like my mother. Maybe some people actually do choose the people they love." "I'm choosing," Mia Marcus said. "That's not complicated. But I think I'm also choosing you. Not instead of Mia, but alongside Mia." "I'm terrified," Victoria said, and the vulnerability in her voice was something he'd never heard before. "I'm terrified that I'm going to let myself care about you, and then you're going to go back to your old patterns, or that something else is going to happen, or that I'm going to mess this up because I don't know how to do this." "We'll figure it out," Marcus said. "We'll mess it up and figure it out and keep trying. That's what presence is. It's showing up even when it's messy." "Okay," Victoria said, and she said it like it was a promise. The winter season brought another showcase. The third-grade teachers had written a Christmas play, and Mia had asked if she could audition for the lead role. The lead role was a Christmas angel, a small, delicate part that required holding still on stage for long stretches, required presence without action. Mia had gotten the part. The showcase was held in the same multi-purpose room, and Marcus arrived early again. Victoria arrived at almost the same time, carrying 3 hot chocolates, one regular for Marcus, one with extra cream for Mia, one with a cinnamon shot for herself. They sat together in the multi-purpose room while parents arrived and settled into their seats. Some people looked at them curiously. Some people didn't look at all. What they saw, Victoria and Marcus sitting side by side, Victoria's hand briefly touching Marcus's arm, the easy comfort between them, wasn't traditional. But it wasn't their job to make other people comfortable with their choices. Mia came on stage wearing a white dress with paper wings, and she stood very still. She had 2 lines, and she delivered them with perfect clarity. The greatest gift is not what you receive, but who receives it with you. And love is not something we find. It is something we choose. And while she was saying these lines, she was looking directly at Marcus and Victoria, and the meaning underneath the words was clear. I see you. I see what you're choosing. I see that I'm part of it. When the play ended and the parents were clapping, Victoria stood. And so did Marcus. They clapped for their daughter, because that's what Mia had become to both of them. Their daughter in the way that mattered, in the way that required showing up every single day. And when Mia came out to find them, she ran. She ran to both of them, and she took their hands, and she didn't doubt anymore. There was no hesitation, no test to see if they would stay. There was just trust, the kind that had been built slowly, day by day, through consistent presence. That night, after Mia was asleep, really asleep, not just pretending to be asleep, Marcus and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with coffee. It was late, maybe 10 p.m., and the apartment was very quiet except for the sound of Mia's small breathing from her bedroom. Do you ever regret meeting me? Victoria asked. Your life got complicated. No, Marcus said, because before complicated meant hiding how broken things were. Now complicated means real. It means Mia has a father who's actually present. It means I have someone in my life who challenges me and loves me at the same time. It means that the complications are worth the cost. Victoria nodded slowly. She was holding her coffee cup, but she wasn't drinking from it. She was just holding it like it was grounding her. I've been thinking about something she said. I was supposed to leave after my consulting contract was over. I was supposed to write my report and move on to the next company. But I didn't. I extended the contract. And then I quit. I left that job. I don't think I realized until recently how much of that decision was because of you and Mia. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus asked. Because I was still scared, Victoria said. Because I was still testing to see whether you'd go back to your old patterns. But you didn't. You kept showing up. And Mia kept trusting. And I kept watching, and I realized that I didn't want to just be watching anymore. I wanted to be part of it. You are part of it, Marcus said. You're part of our lives. You're part of our family. I know, Victoria said. And there was something like peace in her voice. And that's terrifying and wonderful and more than I ever thought I would get. They sat together in the quiet kitchen. And they didn't need to fill the silence with words. The silence had become something safe. The silence was the sound of people who had learned to be present with each other, who had learned that presence didn't require constant performance or constant reassurance. Presence was just being there, being honest, being willing to keep showing up even when it got hard. Marcus reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. Thank you, he said. For what? Victoria asked. For not letting me hide, Marcus said. For making me face what I'd done to Mia. For sitting with her when I couldn't. For being someone worth showing up for. Victoria squeezed his hand. Thank you for proving that people can change. For showing me that presence is a real choice, not just a fantasy. For letting me matter. The real story isn't about rescue. It's not about a powerful woman saving a struggling single father. And it's not about a father who suddenly became perfect after one mistake. The real story is about what happens when someone finally recognizes that they've been building their life on a foundation that doesn't hold weight, and they decide to rebuild it, brick by brick, with intention. It's about Marcus understanding that showing up financially is different from showing up physically, emotionally, presently. It's about him making the harder choice, the choice that costs him money, status, the admiration of people like Derek, because something inside him finally broke open and demanded that he choose his daughter first, and then choosing her again the next day, and the next day, and the next day, until the choosing became a practice rather than a performance. It's about Victoria learning that distance is a choice, that walls can crack, that letting someone matter doesn't have to be a disaster. It's about her understanding that her mother's absence had taught her a lesson that wasn't true, that people couldn't be depended on. But seeing in Marcus and Mia a counter-narrative, evidence that some people actually do show up, that some people actually do choose presence even when it's hard. It's about Mia learning that she doesn't have to hold herself upright and wait for someone to maybe come. It's about a 6-year-old girl being given back her childhood, given the knowledge that the people she loves will be present, that she doesn't have to build contingency plans for their love. The justice that comes from this story is quiet. Derek isn't punished in any dramatic way. He's just left behind. A man who believed that sacrifice had to be measured in ambition, that presence was weakness. His words fade. His judgment becomes irrelevant. What matters is that Mia stops believing them, that Marcus stops hearing them, that Victoria stops fearing them. The victory is not about Marcus getting a promotion. It's not about Victoria becoming perfect. It's not about Mia becoming some resilient, articulate survivor who speaks about her trauma at conferences. The victory is smaller and more real. Marcus at school pickup at 3:15 p.m. every single day. Victoria sometimes waiting by her car on certain afternoons when her new job allows it. Mia walking out of school knowing that both of them will be there, or knowing why one of them couldn't make it. Knowing that the absence is not abandonment. The victory is the three of them sitting at a kitchen table on a random Tuesday, eating dinner, talking about the things that happened in their days. It's Mia doing her homework while Marcus is in the next room, and she can call for him if she needs help, knowing that he'll come. It's Victoria finally letting herself trust that stability exists, that commitment is real, that some promises get kept. It's the Christmas play, and the next school event, and the next one, and the building of a life that doesn't look traditional, but feels true. It's the knowledge that presence isn't something you achieve once and then rest on. It's something you choose over and over, in the small moments that make up a life. When Mia is older, she won't remember the exact detail of sitting on that bench, but she'll carry forward the knowledge that when she waited, someone came. That knowledge will shape how she loves, how she trusts, how she builds her own family, either in the traditional sense or in whatever configuration feels true to her. Marcus will never be the guy who stays late at the office climbing toward promotions, but he'll be the guy whose daughter doesn't flinch when he walks in the door. He'll be the guy who knows her favorite song, who understands why the drain in the bathtub used to scare her, who shows up at every school event, and believes that this presence is actually the most important work he'll ever do. And Victoria will learn that letting people matter doesn't destroy you. That presence with others teaches you how to be present with yourself. That the walls we build to protect ourselves become the walls that imprison us. The story ends not with perfection, but with choice. With the choice to keep showing up, with the choice to be honest instead of impressive, with the choice to let people matter. And every single day they wake up and choose it again.